about the
Speak.
Okay, Clayborn, what's important to remember about Milwaukee's civil rights efforts?
There are a lot of people paid a tremendous price to make changes in this community. The one very important thing is education and the right to vote. And their efforts really addressed that in terms of where they could live it so that they could get a decent education. So education is a key centered here, where you live at, the right to vote, all was based on being able to think for yourself, get a decent job, and live a quality life.
Talk about the education effort that Lloyd Barbie sort of headed up.
Well, Lloyd Barbie and a whole bunch of other folks, he was just part of it, and he getting the word through some of the state or the Supreme Court legislators like Thurgood Marshall would visit Milwaukee and ask that rhetorical question, what is Milwaukee doing about Brown versus the Board of Education? And Lloyd is asking that question of Milwaukee public school systems. They're saying, we're taking care of the business. There is a real legitimate integration going, but in truth it wasn't. The racial isolation, bringing African American kids from the black community to the white schools and just simply isolating them in one given spot, not allowing them to intermix and intercommunicate with the European students throughout the school system. That is just as bad as the racial or separate but equal doctrine that we have been practicing for some 60 years.
So that's what the busing effort was about, to stop that kind of busing of black kids just to be isolated.
That's right. The signs clearly say stop busing for the purpose of segregation, and that is exactly what Milwaukee Public School System doing. And the official term of it was racial isolation. Again, bringing African American students to white schools and segregating them in these rooms and not allowing them to intermix and communicate with other students. And that's what it was all about. It was about breaking down barriers between African American and white students and getting them to get to know each other and not see each other as oppositions or problems, but rather treat each other as respect, along with obviously better books and along with better classrooms, environments, and what we call a decent education. A decent education brings the quality of life up in Milwaukee, especially the African American community.
Well, let's also talk about something that doesn't get a lot of shrift. Talk about the early efforts before the open housing marches, etc., for jobs.
Well, the NAACP and other organizations worked very diligently to boycott and demonstrate at various organizations, Woolworth and Big Boys and other department heads as such, to get us jobs in those places. We piggybacked off of the national effort that was going on in the South, such as Greensboro and other places that were boycotting. But the truth of the matter is those places did not want to open up. They saw African Americans as doing the hard to dirty, the undesirable work that existed. And we were recruited to come up to Milwaukee from the South to do, again, the work that no one else wanted to do. Department stores and other restaurants as such was not the undesirable work.
Talk about that migration and how that affected the movement and the growth of the black community.
Well, I'd say that there was a major effort first to recruit African Americans. Sure. I'd say, I'd start out by saying that the Europeans, I'll start out by saying that the United States stopped and blocked new migration or immigration to the United States, simply because we had been in World War I, World War II, and they did not want new immigrants coming to the United States. But we had a sizable number of Europeans in this community, and nepotism and other kinds of recruitment of Europeans to these key jobs had continued. But there was a need for the dirty jobs, the jobs that no one wanted, working in the tannery, the heavy jobs, the asphalting of streets, and to working around chemicals, the dangerous jobs that I didn't say. But African Americans had clearly saw what they had been through in the South, racism, hard times, sharecropping. They wanted no more parts of that. So in the course of the night, many of them just simply gathered their belongings. They came by themselves. They brought their families up later. Some of them brought their families hook or crook. They came by bus, cab, whatever way they could get up here, but they came up here. And they had gotten word through letters, newspaper recruitments. Chicago was one of the key hubs in which African Americans came to first, and then later made their way into Milwaukee, hearing about opportunities that existed. Another real important thing is welfare existed here in Milwaukee. In many other places, it did not exist. Living in Chicago myself, we lived in one room and life was horrible. And we learned about opportunities in Milwaukee, and we came up. Dad got a job working on a farm. He would bring a small amount of money and a huge half end of a cow home for payment for his week or 2 weeks work. Well, we cut that pig up, and when he brought it in, it was dripping blood and everything else. But it was better than what it was in the South. And so it provided for us a new opportunity to get a decent job and get an education. And African Americans in general were looking for housing, education, and jobs to provide a new life for themselves so that they wouldn't have to go through the same struggles as they went through in the South.
So,
I was long-winded with that. I apologize.
That's okay. That's all right. We'll work with that. And so, I mean, the African American community grew by leaps and bounds. In 1945, it was like 15,000 people.
Yeah.
By 1970, it was over 100,000.
Yeah, and yet we still couldn't get the real meaningful jobs. For example, we asked a rhetorical question of 1974, and that's we're here in large numbers there, 150,000 people, and we're after the riots, and there were stimulus dollars that came into this community, training people, having workshops on how to create your own business. But that question about, and I pose it just as a rhetorical question, how many African American firefighters exist in the city of Milwaukee in 1974? They asked that question, and there was 5 African American. Of 1,000 positions that existed at that time, only they could generate 5. It was easier to be a surgeon than to be a firefighter in the city of Milwaukee. And it doesn't require a whole bunch to do that. And yet the system has earmarked that as one of their select kind of jobs that African Americans were not qualified to do. And there are many other jobs like that.
Let's talk about the black church. How important was the black church in the movement?
Huge. I mean, but before I talk about the black church, I like to talk about the people involved, those young people as part of the NAACP, and those people who galvanized, before I talk about that, I'd like to talk about those young people that provided the energy, the strength, the lifeblood of the movement. And these were just regular people off the street. These were just regular John Does, people who just from the South, people who had no more education or no more understanding of fair housing and what Lloyd Bobby was fighting for, equal education. They just simply understood that they had been unfairly done, and they wanted ends to this. They wanted to participate in this in a way in which it made a change for themselves and their families. And they grew and they learned and they became real educated people who committed themselves to this. I mean, to the point that you ask them about this 35 years, 50 years later, and their answer is, I would have never done it differently. I would have done this. And all of these people rise to some level of prominency. All of these people become educated, all of it. And it's partly because of Father Graffy who empowered them, who not only led them but educated them along the way and gave them direction and purpose for what it is. They understood what they were fighting for, and that's different in many other cases. So we got John Does off the street, just regular people who made this movement real. And then then we go to the churches, because the churches were those earlier groups that I mentioned are just simply young people and a select few. Even at the most, we're talking 50 people. But then the masses comes from the church, and the pastors. That's the next level. Pastor, I'm sorry, I'm stumbling over my words. Bowen, Pastor Phillips, Pastor. I'm sorry. I get a pause a minute here. I'm just, but the pastors. All right, here I am now. The church was so important. It was the pastors that bring that next level. Pastors from Greater Galilee, Phillips, St. Mark's Church, Reverend Horde from Calvary Baptist Church, St. Mark's, St. Matthew's Church over on 9th Street, Reverend Bowen. All of these pastors explain the most important aspects of this to their congregation and encourage their congregations when the word came out to actually, not on the nightly marches that people of the 200 nights, but those special kind of marches, the churches, family members, children's whole families came out to march along with Father Grappi, and they were protected by the NAACP Youth Council going across the 16th Street Bridge, demonstrating in front of the judges' home. They came out and lodged them. And they were important. They were important because they realized that their best interest was at stake here. They realized that we're talking about educating their children, and that's the purpose for them coming up and settling in Milwaukee, is to get a decent and fair education.
Talk about the Freedom Schools. What were they?
The Freedom Schools were a boycott that existed there was like 3 or 4 of them. And the kids actually boycotted the schools, their schools, and they went to the churches that housed them. St. Mark's was one, St. Benefit was one. There were a lot of small churches that actually had freedom schools in them. Small numbers, as few as 10, to some cases they had as many as 400 or 500 kids swamping churches. I mean, it was just unbelievable. And they themselves panicked, what are we going to do with all these kids? But they did things like jump rope. They had history lessons in there. They wrote lesson plans. Did all kinds of interesting things. They made it a very successful. Some of those same rooms used over at St. Matthew's Church today was where the freedom schools were.
Is there anything we haven't talked about that you wanted to talk about?
Did I answer your question as it relates to the freedom schools?
Yeah.
Okay, because it was really important, and I think the freedom schools are important because it showed the parents' participation in this march, and it showed how they indeed wanted change for their kids in terms of getting a decent and fair education. Although they were not as easy to verbalize it, they really was on board in terms of making change for their kids in their schools. And you got that energy. People learned about that in the churches. And so that's why the churches were so important. The pastors at the pulpit explained. They were touched by the expressway. The expressway did impact their thinking, especially those people on St. Matthew's Church and Greater Galilee. The bulldozers came right up to their houses, and people asked a rhetorical question: where is it that we're going to move to? Because they had no places. The restricted covenants existed all throughout the city, and although it wasn't official, it was unofficial in terms of hey, you can't move here. You can, for whatever reason you want to come up with, there aren't any African Americans living in it, not unless you have a substantial amount of money in terms of being able to purchase houses.
Talk about the expressway and what that did to the community.
Well, it divided it. It divided it in such a way in which it caused real harm to the community. People were resentful. It as if it was as if there was no respect for the African American community when they just simply drove their road. They created museums where people could come and learn about it. Of course, there was this myth that the expressways were used as a military route to ship there. And we're just coming off of the riots and that kind of thing. And so people are leery of the expressway and what ultimately it meant for them. They didn't see it meaning anything for them other than the fact that it actually divided it. Take a look at 3rd Street, which was at that point a shopping area for African Americans. It just went dead. And it divided the African American community up. If you really talk about the real question, what happened to the people who lived in that corridor? Many of them had to go down south. Some of them moved up north. Some of them moved in people's basements and doubled up in people's homes. It was a nightmare. Many people left the city because of that.
Have race relations changed since the civil rights movement in Milwaukee? Have they gotten better, worse, stay the same?
It's difficult to answer that question. We still rank real high in the incarceration of African American men. The system thinks that law enforcement is the answer, not jobs and not education, but law enforcement is the answer to resolving problems. We still rank high in terms of infant mortality and teenage pregnancy, and although educational reform is born in Milwaukee, that is spread throughout this entire nation in many places throughout the world, too few of our young people are graduating from, too few of our young people are graduating from high school and going on to college. So I think that question really is a real obvious question. You don't need to be talking about how many arrests if our kids are not getting an education. If money is not allocated towards the community and people can't vote, then people are going to act a certain way because they're not educated, and if they act a certain way, it gives reason and for the arrests to occur. They burst. When the education funds, job opportunities are not, people don't riot the streets in Milwaukee like they do in other cities. They internalize it, and you see it in women walking the streets taking drugs. You see it in incarceration of men. You see it in family fights throughout neighborhoods. You see it in breakups and divorces. You see it in women being left alone and having to provide for themselves. You see it in young boys refusing not to take the same kind of punishment as they see their other brothers and sisters taking, meaning that they're going to have a car, like they see this white boy across the street. They're going to have a car. Now, if it means that they have to rob to get that car, they're going to have that car. Sorry, I don't mean to go off on that, but it's so true.
That's fine. I understand exactly what you're saying. What do we need to tell the world and our future generations about the civil rights movement? What's important to remember about what happened in Milwaukee?
A lot happened here, and I really don't think most people realize what happened here. I think most people forget about the riot that took place, and that's a very important message that needs to be talked about as well. But the desegregation of school systems led by Lloyd Bobby and Father James Groppe with the Fair Housing Movement, all three of those things are very, very important things that happened in Milwaukee's history that has impacted this entire nation. in terms of talking about how important education is and the right to live where you want to live to obtain the kind of quality of life that you want as an American citizen. That's a very important message, and we do it. We do it every day by giving people chances and by helping people to get an education. Yet I'm not sure